Hello, everyone. It's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. So, guys, tonight I have Jared Beck, the DNC fraud lawsuit bringer, the bringer of rain in this case. But the DNC fraud lawsuit, in addition to the author of a new book, What Happened to Bernie Sanders. Jared, please tell the audience hello.
Hello.
Okay. To be fair, I did just say please tell the audience hello. I was specific.
I like to follow instructions, Jamal.
Fair enough. Fair enough. So how's it been going? It's been a while since we've talked. I think it's been maybe a little bit less than a year.
Right.
So what has been going on? Well, before we go to anything else, you're the person, you and your wife bought the DNC fraud lawsuit. Essentially claiming that the DNC committed fraud in the way that it pursued its affairs for that primary. What were the results ultimately of that particular lawsuit, at least the first time around?
Well, the lawsuit is still active. The procedural posture is that the district court, which is the first level of court you go to in any lawsuit, the trial court, in federal court, dismissed the case for lack of standing, which means that it did not decide the case on the merits. There was no trial. There was no examination of evidence. What the court did was it examined the legal arguments that the Democratic National Committee and Wasserman Schultz brought forth in their second motion to dismiss the case before trial. And it examined those arguments, and it agreed with the defendants on one point of law, which is that regardless of whether the rigging happened and the DNC committed fraud, the court ruled that our clients, the Bernie Sanders donors, do not have what is called legal standing to bring their claims in federal court. And so that was
who would have. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, so that was the basis for the court's order. That order we appealed to the first level of appellate courts in the federal system, which is the 11th Circuit Court of Appeal that sits in Atlanta, Georgia. And the court, the 11th Circuit, issued, after we filed our notice of appeal, it issued two what are called jurisdictional questions to the parties. In other words, and this is unusual, I've seen courts issue one jurisdictional question to the parties. I've never seen a court issue two successive jurisdictional questions to a party, which indicates to me that the court is taking this case very, very seriously at the appellate level.
Okay, so two questions.
Yeah.
First, who would have standing if not the people who were voting for him? I mean, that feels weird to me. It's like I gave my money to Sanders. They cheated Sanders or defrauded me out of my money, just taking this from an individual person standpoint. Right. I was the one that gave it. How come I am not the one that have standing to bring the lawsuit? Well, who would have standing in that case if not the people who were defrauded?
Right, the people who paid the money. That's an excellent question. And on appeal, we are going to be both parties are going to be briefing that precise question and the question that the lower court ruled on. I agree with you, Jamal. I think that paying money based on fraudulent representations, fraudulent omissions, deceptive representations is the quintessential form of standing.
That's the point.
That's what the legal system does for the most part. I mean, it resolves issues over the payment of money. That's the civil system. Obviously, we also have things like personal injury lawsuits and medical malpractice and toxic torts and things like that. But as a civil litigator, I can tell you that in my 10-year plus career litigating cases in the civil system, the vast majority of those involve the payment of money by one of the parties, whether it's in a breach of contract case or a fraud case, such as the DNC case. And it would be, in my opinion, I've never seen a case in which, in my practice, in which a court has ruled that a party which has paid money based on fraudulent misrepresentation does not have standing to pursue fraud claims. And so it's carved out a very, very special exception. And I think when you read the court's order, and I would encourage everyone to go to the JAMPAC website where we've uploaded the order and folks can read the court's, I mean, it's a 21 page order. The court doesn't just make a ruling, it explains its reasoning for the ruling. I would encourage everyone to look at it and look at all the papers in the case and make up your own mind about the legal arguments presented. But in my opinion, the court has made a very special exception for a political party. And when we were back at the hearing, the second hearing in this case, where the lawyer for the DNC actually got up in open court and said to the judge, the DNC has the right to choose the candidate any way it wants to. It can go into back rooms and smoke cigars, and that would be okay, even though the charter says very explicitly that the conduct of the primaries shall be fair and even-handed with respect to all of the candidates for nomination. The DNC lawyer said that in court. What he also said at that hearing was that the court should not wade into political disputes. And so the DNC has, from the beginning, characterized this case as a political dispute, a political gripe, so to speak, brought by Bernie Sanders supporters who are upset that Bernie Sanders did not win the nomination. And so that their only grievance is that they want a different candidate than the candidate who was selected. And I've tried to make that very, very clear to the court that that's not the crux of this suit. The crux is the payment of money and the fact that people opened up their wallets and paid approximately $250 million in the course of the 2016 primaries to Bernie Sanders, not because they were, they were in some dream, irrational dream state, and they just felt like giving their money away to some fruitless endeavor, but because they genuinely believed that Bernie Sanders had a chance to win the Democratic primary because that primary was being run in a proper fashion.
Right.
And we now know, because WikiLeaks has given us an unprecedented view on the inner workings of the DNC, we now know that even before Bernie Sanders entered the race, the DNC was already putting out memos telling its staff that, hey, everything we're doing from this point forward is to elevate Hillary Clinton to the presidency.
And this is even before the WikiLeaks stuff came out, though. Like, even from the information that was known at the time of the lawsuit, treating this as a political thing. So it's almost as if the judge is making a distinction between politics and real life, as if those things are somehow separate and distinct.
That's a great way of putting it, Jamal.
Well, the party is a corporation. I mean,
Correct.
At the end of the day, the reason why that party can say we can choose whoever we want, we can pick them in a back room, is because in the same way that Apple can choose the president of their company or some other company can choose their internal workings, the Democratic Party, Republican Party are just two corporations. They can choose whoever they want in that context. Treating it as if it's a political matter when these guys are essentially taking the argument of we're corporations, we can do whatever we want, is a little, that's a little disingenuous. If you're asking me and telling me, look, you can participate in the process. Yes, this is our internal workings. But yes, you can participate in the process. We're going to use government property, schools, and everything else to run these primaries. And our charter says we're going to be fair, we're going to be open, we're going to be honest, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And like you said, those people were giving Sanders money. If the DNC would have came out and said, look, we have a favorite in this race. We're giving the money that's essentially given to the state parties to Hillary Clinton because for the most part, we've made a choice.
Right.
Walter Schultz has essentially given over all control of the reins to what's taking place in New York, made in the Clinton campaign.
Right.
We're going to give you that up front.
Right.
Would Sanders have gotten $220 million if the DNC was honest about their intentions? And the answer is no.
Right.
The answer is no. Like, so the very fact that the information changes people's opinion or people's behavior is some indication of fraud. That it's like, it's hard to make that argument that you can't commit fraud in political circles. It's like, no, you can commit fraud in political circles,
Well,
particularly when it's a corporation.
yeah, I think you hit all the issues that are going to be looked at in this appeal in depth by the appellate panel. I think you hit those issues right on the head. And I would just say, look, there are lines of cases that go back in the case law where people sue as voters, and they say, look, I was a supporter of X candidate. I don't believe the election was fair. I'm suing because I was harmed. And the courts have, in those cases, typically said there's no standing. What makes our case so much different from this line of cases is the historic raising of money by Bernie Sanders, and the fact that we are bringing this case not on behalf of disillusioned voters, but donors who, as you just said, would not have paid money if they had known the truth about the democratic process. And if the DNC leaders had said from the get-go, yeah, Bernie is a nominee, but he's not going to get the nomination because we've already determined that Hillary Clinton's going to be our nominee.
Yeah, it's her turn.
No one in their right mind is going to give money to Bernie Sanders. And that's everybody from, we have the range of people, socioeconomic strata of society that are represented in the people that have contacted us and expressing their desire to be part of this suit. And it's everybody from, lawyers and doctors that spent the maximum in terms of the donations to the campaign, and they bought signs on the highways, to we have people who are homeless. Okay. And they were reaching into whatever they could give to Bernie Sanders because they genuinely believed they were contributing to a genuine effort in a fair election process to get this man elected. And it just wasn't show. And it just wasn't true. And I just think it's unconscionable that people in that position wouldn't have a remedy to go into court and to be able to say, I was defrauded.
Yeah, agreed. Because otherwise there is no remedy. Like it completely decapitates the idea of a remedy if you say there is no such thing as standing in this case. It's like you need standing. Okay, how do you get standing? Oh, there is no standing.
There is no standing.
Political matter. That's an amazing state. I mean, that is profound. Like that's a profound statement. You've essentially said you need standing in this case, and even the people who are defrauded themselves don't have standing. And it's like, okay, well, who have standing if not the people who are actually defrauded in this situation? That's amazing.
Yeah,
that's an amazing statement.
Well, I think, and the law traditionally does not approve of the violation of legal rights without remedies. But that's what's going on here. I mean, there's no other place you can bring a complaint like this. I mean, sure, you can try to file complaints with the FEC, not going to damages, of course, but going to the propriety of the election process. But the FEC, I mean, talk about a pretty useless.
Yeah, they're inept. It's like 3 Republicans, 3 Democrats, if I'm not mistaken.
And let's not forget, this isn't the only piece of litigation to arise out of the primaries. I mean, you had lawsuits filed across the country, including lawsuits in California, New York, Illinois, challenging, they right after the primaries, challenging, purging of ballots, challenging conduct of Democratic officials. At the city level. There was one case that went all the way through to trial in San Diego that I'm aware of, where they found that I believe the voter registrar was improperly certifying the returns. And but my point is, there's no remedy for any of that. You can have findings like that, but there's never going to be. I can tell you, given the state of our legal system and where our political system is at, you're never going to have a court in a position where it's going to say, you know what, we need to redo this presidential election because there was too much fraud in it, or there too much irregularity. That's just not a remedy. So if you can't even sue, you can't sue for that. You can't sue for your money back. You're effectively saying that there is no control over our elections, no quality control whatsoever.
Yeah, I remember right after the election, I think it was in like Wisconsin or somewhere, they were trying to get a recount. Didn't even want to recount. It's like, not only are we not going to, they were throwing 200,000 people off the ballots in New York illegally.
Yeah.
Like it's, and they would say, "Oh, it's just a coincidence that that was Bernie Sanders' hometown." It's like it's just a coincidence.
Well, and they found the purging of the voter rolls.
Yeah.
In New York. I mean, those are findings. I mean, those are you know, if we had an actual system of election accountability in this country, I mean, that would be grounds, I would think, for seriously considering whether we have to redo this whole election. If you're properly purging voters on a massive scale in New York, it's a pivotal state in the primary, and you know it. But forget about it. That's never going to happen. It just
there's
doesn't
no recourse.
in the US.
Yeah, there's no recourse, and I think that's the most. You hear people sometimes have this conversation about a political revolution or revolution, and those things, when there's no case for reform. And ultimately what I'm hearing is the political system in no way is being challenged by the legal system itself. Meaning if something takes place where people are being disenfranchised, where people are being kicked off the ballots illegally, whether people's choice, meaning you're in a representative government and they're doing things to hamper your ability to choose the representative that you want. And even after the process is over, not having any capability at all in going over to check to make sure that the process was correct. Meaning how many votes did this person get or that person get during a recount? Oh, we don't do recounts. Or you're going to spend millions and millions of dollars in order to figure out who actually won. Right. That's profoundly sad.
Yes.
Like there's no way to know whether the representative that's chosen is the actual representative that the public wanted.
Right. And it just goes to the, you know, at the end of the day, you know, our elections are not, I think we've reached the point where we can, maybe we're not entitled to call ourselves a country where democratic elections occur in any meaningful sense. And I think we have to start grappling with the consequences of that. And, you bring up, the concept of political revolution. Of course, that was a catchphrase that Bernie Sanders himself made a pivotal part of his campaign. And I mean, revolutions can happen in all sorts of ways. Perhaps the elections themselves are an avenue that, based on the system that we have, are closed off to us as a channel of reform. And, this is, I think, something that progressives are going to have to grapple with, and maybe are grappling with as we speak right now, which is what if, the electoral system that we have makes it impossible for progressives to win, and is designed in no small part to prevent them from winning. And in fact, the book I wrote, which is coming out next month, goes into that question, because I think, what I try to do in that book is present as succinctly and as clearly as possible the evidence that we have, which is all in the public domain, which shows that before he even got into the campaign, or even into the primary process, there was no chance that Bernie Sanders was going to win that nomination. Yeah. And in fact, the rigging occurred at multiple levels, some of which I think a lot of people will be surprised to learn about when they read the book, because I think the concept of rigging is a little bit of a unspecified term.
Right. It's ambiguous.
It occurs at a number of levels, actually. That's how the DNC was able to pull this off. And it's been, it's an organization that, in my view, based on the research that I did for this book, it's been constructed over many years precisely in order to prevent progressive candidates like Bernie Sanders from getting the nomination and ascending to the presidency.
I have my own ideas as to why, but why do you think? Well, two things. What happened to Bernie Sanders? I mean, that's the name of your book, so I'm just asking the question. Like, what happened to Bernie Sanders? I mean, Hillary Clinton's book. What happened? Man, I can't. Just as a quick detour, that book is amazing. What happened? That book is amazing. Like, you lose to a reality show host, and then you write a book about how it's everybody else's fault. but my own. If it was Comey, blacks weren't sufficiently loyal, Hispanics weren't sufficiently loyal. I couldn't get enough gays rallying behind me. The air was thick that day, so people couldn't get out of bed in the morning. Somebody slipped. So, I mean, just any little weird thing except for me. Blame everybody else but me.
Yeah, you know, I read Hillary Clinton's account thoroughly for the book that I wrote. Because, well, you know, I think it's important that when we're trying to answer the question, what happened, you know, in my case, I was specifically focusing on Bernie Sanders. You have to aggregate all the viewpoints that are available in order to get the truth. I mean, that's part of what you do as a lawyer. And I tried to approach this book as a lawyer because, you know, in the event that we don't get a trial in the DNC
public record
lawsuit, because we're on appeal now. I mean, appeals are tough in any case. Only 5% to 6% of federal appeals succeed. Okay.
One question. You said jurisdictional request. What's a jurisdictional request? You said they issued 2.
Yeah. So the court issued this. It was very interesting. The 11th Circuit issued 2 what are called jurisdictional questions. Which, in other words, the court gets the initial papers. It reads the judge's order, and then it can sua sponte ask questions to the parties and ask the parties to brief those. In this case, it wanted to address one part of the judge's opinion, which was the question not of standing, but of jurisdiction, and whether the parties, the allegations in the complaint were sufficient to establish federal jurisdiction over this question before they even get to the question of standing. And,
I see. I see.
Yeah, because the judge suggested that we hadn't adequately alleged standing or jurisdictional facts. There's some, you know, uncertainty at this stage because remember, a class action doesn't become a true class action until the court certifies it as such, and we hadn't reached the certification stage when the lower court dismissed the case. So the 11th Circuit wanted to make doubly sure that it had jurisdiction over this question before it got to the question of standing, and it ruled in our favor after issuing the second question. But I bring that up not just because it's an interesting sort of technical point, but it shows that the 11th Circuit is paying extraordinarily close attention to this case. It's taking, as did the district court. And, you know, I say that based on my experience as a litigator. You don't always even get hearings in cases. You're not entitled to them. So the amount of time that the courts have spent thus far on the case is very, very encouraging, that at the very least we're going to get a very closely reasoned decision at the appellate court level.
One last question on this before going into the book. What were you going for? Like, so what was it? Let's say everything went the way that you wanted. The appeals court grants you the appeal. They listen to the case. You do a magnificent job. And they come back with a decision saying, yes, all of these people were defrauded. The $220 million that Bernie Sanders got, those people would not have given that money if those people knew that Bernie Sanders was going to be cheated. What were you? Okay, 2 questions. I'm sorry. First question is there any change to the information that's being presented with Donna Brazil's revelation in this case? That wasn't really a revelation, but Donna Brazil coming out herself saying, yes, they rigged it. And 2, what were you going for? Meaning, what was the ultimate goal in regards to what you wanted? If this became a class action lawsuit, what pound of blood or what pound of skin were you going to extract from the Democratic Party of the DNC?
Yeah, excellent questions. In terms of Donna Brazil, I categorize her revelations, her book, her interview with Tim Black, which I thought was very good. I don't know if you saw Tim Black.
I did. Yeah, I did.
December. You know, it's interesting because she makes contradictions in that interview, or she makes statements that contradict her what she said in the book in writing.
Yeah.
And I've read that book. I mean, if we get to the discovery phase, it'll be very, very interesting to put these conflicting statements in front of her and ask her to reconcile them. And so you know, everything she said on the public record, you know, think about it, you know, not just her book, but her statements to Tim Black, you know, they're fair game. I mean, at a deposition, you can ask pretty much anything that may lead to the discovery of admissible evidence that you present at trial. So in terms of what we were going for, no, in terms of Donna Brazil, I put that in the category of additional evidence that supplements what we already know and fills out the story that will have to be told at trial, because ultimately at trial you tell a story through witnesses.
Okay.
Okay. You have documents, and we already have tons of documents in this case, and we haven't even gotten to the discovery stage. But then you present those documents through live witness testimony in most cases that the jury hears. And so if you can imagine, Donna Brazil is very much a material witness to the events of this case. Obviously, the defendant, Debbie Wasserman Schultz.
Put her ass on the stand, yes. He has a grill.
Well, and all of the witnesses, all of the recipients of the various WikiLeaks emails that have come out that show the DNC to have made up its mind about who the nominee was going to be before the primaries even started. I mean, you just go down the list, okay, and then you present those witnesses at trial. Documents get entered into evidence that the jury gets to take back with them into the jury room, and then they return a verdict. And then that leads us, well, what are you seeking in this case? Well, number one, in any lawsuit, you're seeking a verdict, and a verdict is a finding ultimately of fact and the application of fact to the applicable law. So a jury finding that the DNC committed fraud and that Debbie Wasserman Schultz committed fraud against their own base, their own party members, okay, how powerful would that be? I mean, this is something, we're trying to get the truth out to the American people. And I think everybody is starting to realize, the major obstacle to the truth is the mainstream media, right?
Yeah.
Which runs interference on every issue, right? I mean, it hasn't even covered this lawsuit. It wants to talk, Trump, Russia every day, Trump, Russia, but has it run one single tiny little story on the fact that the DNC's lawyers got up in open court and admitted to a federal judge that they can pick the candidate any way they want? I mean, that seems like a remarkable
deal. Yeah, that's a massive deal. One of the parties essentially, we can cheat whenever we want to cheat. You can't do anything about it.
But you see that the mainstream media runs interference between that fact, and that's not fake news. That's in a transcript. Okay, right. That's in a transcript, a court record, and anybody who wants to can read it themselves and see it in black and white. But they don't. It's never been reported in the mainstream media. So, but you get a jury returning a verdict in federal court. Well, now you're getting to the point where the mainstream media doesn't have any choice.
You got to cover
court because you're talking about a federal jury. Okay, and so that would be, I think, at this point when we're talking about the big issues, that's pretty big in terms of what we would want to achieve. The secondary. Well, I don't think it is secondary. I think it's equally important, actually, is damages. Okay? Damages are the way that the civil justice system in this country rights a wrong. Okay? So when you have a tort, such as fraud, and a jury comes back and says these defendants committed fraud against these plaintiffs, what's the consequence? Well, on the criminal side, the consequence is that if you violate a wire fraud statute, you're going to jail. Okay? In the civil side, you're paying damages, okay? In this case, we're talking, our starting point is the money that people paid to Bernie Sanders and lost.
$220 million.
Yeah, roughly. Okay, but that's a starting point, Yeah. You're also talking about interest on that money. Depending on, if we can make certain statutes apply to the conduct that prohibit fraudulent conducts in certain jurisdictions, we could get treble damages on that. Okay. In a fraud case, you can also get punitive damages. Okay. In other words, the jury can multiply the sum because you got to punish fraudulent conduct under the law. You have to deter people from doing it. So you have to come down, not just, return the money, but hit you with a penalty. So, we're talking about an organization that isn't doing particularly financially well right now.
No, they're not. This is why I'm asking this question.
So imagine
$500 million to an organization that's like $7 million in the bank.
Well, now imagine, thinking to the next step. Now you've got that judgment entered in against a company, maybe for a company like Apple. That's just a matter of like going into like the spare change drawer and paying that off, right? Because they've got billions and billions and billions of dollars just sitting in the bank. But for the DNC, which isn't exactly raising money like it needs to be doing in order to be a viable competitor against the RNC, that's going to actually, a judgment like that's going to put you into bankruptcy court. Almost certainly.
It's called bankruptcy.
Unless they can get someone to pay that off.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And look, there should be a penalty for it. I mean, you've cheated a large segment of the population. And you can make a strong argument that the reason why Trump is in that office today is for what took place in the primaries.
I think it's more than a strong argument. I think it's the truth. I mean, Bernie Sanders today comes down in every poll as the most popular politician. Yeah. And that was true, I think, in the election process. I mean, I would say that Donald Trump would, he's won a lot of things recently, but I think he would still kill to have Bernie Sanders' popularity numbers.
Oh God, yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, I think Trump is like 30%, and I mean that number sounds remarkably low, but even Congress is less than that. Like Congress is in the toilet.
So go back to 2016. Bernie Sanders wins the primaries like he's supposed to, and now you have a Bernie Sanders Donald Trump matchup.
Trump gets trashed. He gets destroyed in that contest. Well, I don't even think it's a contest.
Well, first of all, Bernie Sanders doesn't share any of Hillary Clinton's weaknesses. We're not talking about a record of, hideous corruption at the highest levels of government. We're not talking about, a spouse that has, raped multiple women and is, we're not talking about a fraudulent, charity that they're running, I mean, all of the, forgetting without even getting to the issue of his policies.
Oh, like NAFTA and this other stuff.
It's like,
how did you lose in Ohio and Wisconsin? It's like, well, you were supporting these trade deals that was going to destroy those states.
Right. I mean, and, obviously, the problems I think that Hillary Clinton experienced in the states where, she didn't visit, with
that too,
blue collar workers. I don't think Bernie Sanders has those issues, but we can talk on and on hypothetically. But at the end of the day, that's that's what was prevented by the fraud.
So let's talk about your book. So what happened to Bernie Sanders? So I'm going to ask the question: what happened to Bernie Sanders? In a nutshell, I know you're not going to go into all the details of the book because you want people to buy the book, but in I guess. In any detail that you want to give, in any way that you want to explain it,
right?
What happened to Bernie Sanders?
Well, the short answer is that he, along with other people, by the way, people forget that there were other candidates at the beginning of this process. It wasn't just Bernie Sanders, but Martin O'Malley was in there for a brief period. Lawrence Lessig. I don't know if people know who Lawrence Lessig was, but he's a law professor at Harvard Law, where I got my law degree.
And out of politics, right?
Yes, and he's done some very, very, really great analyses of the problem with our elections and how at the end of the day it's money that rules the day, and it's the funders of elections are really the people that the only people that politicians care about.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's true. I think it's hard to, I think it's remarkably hard to argue against that point. I mean, you look at, it takes $1 billion to get into the election or to win the presidency. Yeah. And you ask the question, what do you do for that $1 billion? And you look at policies, you look at what these guys say versus what these guys do. And it falls on a particular side, whether you're talking about Democrats or Republicans. For the most part, they see the world in the same terms, just in slightly different ways, or if that makes sense. But all of it runs and depends on cash. It's like, what do you do for the money? And then if you do something that goes against the person who's giving you the money, you're not going to get the money again, or they're going to use it against you to a political opponent.
Yeah. Yeah. And I bring up Lessig not just because he's been in 2012, he was, making these points and I talk about this in the book. Lessig is somebody who understands at a certain level really one of the central flaw in our what we purport to have in this country, which are democratic elections.
Right.
But he was also a primary candidate at the beginning, and people forget this. And the Democratic Party took some pretty extensive steps to make sure that he wasn't going to gain any traction, because his platform was sort of I think it was a, reverse Citizens United platform, something, a single issue, get money out of politics, which may very well have resonated, but he didn't really get the chance because they weren't going to let him attend any of the debates, even though his polling in the very, very early going was significant enough that under their prior announced rules, the DNC's prior announced rules, it was enough to put him in the debates. So, this is familiar again. I mean, it's the same rigging pattern happens again and again. But basically, Bernie Sanders was one of several victims of a fraudulent scheme perpetrated by the Democratic National Committee and its officers on a very large class of people in this country. And, that's what happened to Bernie Sanders. I think the more actually, and I think a lot of people know that sort of already, even if they haven't studied the issues in detail,
70%.
That folks in the media or someone like me have. But I think people instinctively understand that. Okay. I think the more pressing questions that the book seeks to really explore is, how did this rigging occur? And what were the precise steps that occurred to make this rigging possible against Bernie Sanders? And that's what I seek to do in the book. And in a nutshell, I am trying to give people, because like I said, appeals have a very low chance of success. I mean, there's a high likelihood we're not going to get a trial in this case. So based on the public record, I think it's important to present the issues to the public in a way that accords with what you do at trial. Okay, which is, you don't talk in generalities. You don't put broad propositions out there. The meat of the trial, you can do that in opening statement. You can do that in closing statement to some extent. I mean, you can use rhetoric, so to speak. Right. But the meat of a trial is evidence and testimony. Okay, it's piecing together documents and sworn testimony to basically create the story that explains how the misconduct occurred and why the law should be applied against these defendants. That's what you do at trial as a lawyer. And so that's what I seek to do in the book. And so I get very, very detailed. And there's a lot of footnotes in this book. Okay, and I had a little bit of a disagreement with the publisher, because the publisher was telling me, well, people generally don't like books with a lot of footnotes, I mean, if they may get scared away. And I said, look, this is,
it's reference. You're referencing where you get it from. It's like they just, yeah.
Some of it is stylistic, though. I mean, I've always been a big fan of footnotes, because if you think about it, footnotes are like the original hyperlink. Okay?
Yeah, they're hyperlinks. It's like when I used to write, I would hyperlinks all through all my articles.
So, when you surf the web, you're used to having hyperlinks, right? I mean, that's how we navigate the information that's available to us on the internet. And all a hyperlink is really is a footnote, okay? it's a support for a proposition. Okay, so if you're, you know, reading an article on whatever source, and it, for example, the memo that came out today, and it says, you know, you're in the, for example, you're on, I don't know, whatever website, CNN, you're reading the article, and they put a hyperlink in there. You click on the hyperlink. Okay, it takes you to the memo itself, which is the evidence that supports the proposition in the article that you're reading. And that's what you're doing with footnotes. So for me, it's, you know, to not have a lot of footnotes would be to deprive the reader of what I think is important, which is the evidence that supports the propositions I put forward. And I was very, very, you know, I wrote this like I would any brief to a court, which is, you don't, no factual references without specific citations to record evidence. And when I say record evidence, I mean the public record, things in the public domain that people can look up for themselves. And, you know, so if they're reading this in a, you know, whatever format, they can go to, you know, this was a very important part of the process for me. And the book itself also has, you know, for people that want to get it in the, you know, the actual, you know, paper format as opposed to the electronic format or the audio format. And there's going to be an audio book now, but the actual, this was very important to me as well. So for people that might go into the bookstore and buy this, you know, you're going to, and in the electronic as well, you're going to get the actual transcripts from the hearings in the court proceedings, as well as other key documents that support the case, because I think it's very important, especially with respect to the transcripts, that people can read that, even though it's going to make the book pretty thick, okay, because those are very long transcripts. But I want to get those in as many people's hands as possible, because, you know, not everybody, you know, reads material on the internet or the computer well. You know, they prefer, you know, we're still, let's face the facts, we're living in a day and age where a lot of people still like to read, you know, hard copy books, you know, and especially something that's as huge as a transcript. And maybe they like making notes by, you know, pen or pencil or whatever. Well, you know, this is going to give them an opportunity to do that. And I want to make sure. So that was, you know, another thing that sort of, I think, makes this book unique, is a lot of, you know, is that the transcripts are in there. And, you know, at the end of the day, it's a very, I mean, there's a lot of footnotes, and we go through case law, and we go through history, and we go through political theory, and we try to answer the question that's posed by the title as best we can.
No, that makes sense. And I think I understand what you're saying. You're essentially saying, I'm creating a narrative of events of what took place. This is my explanation, and this is information associated with the things that I say. So if I say, Bob went to the bakery, here's a link showing that Bob went to the bakery. And, you know, it's like each thing that's said, there's some kind of material to support the thing that's being said.
Right.
I understand. And personally, I like that. I mean, I like to be able to just go, this is what this guy's saying. This is his thinking of this. This is his workable point of view when he's writing this. Yeah. And this is the information he's using to make it up. And that works in two ways. I mean, you allow people to either challenge the evidence, meaning this is where he's getting this from. I can either challenge it, believe it, or disbelieve it, but they can at least see it.
Yes.
You know, it's not you just coming out of, you know, I just type this up and here it goes. No, I understand that. That makes a lot of sense.
That's exactly, you know, I want it to be something that, look, I'm trying to strip out the political rhetoric as much as possible. That's the other thing. You know, I want to make sure that this is something that gets at the issue from the facts and the law, and not from the perspective of politics, which I think, you know, as a lawyer, you know, we're trained to distill the issues like that. But sort of in the public domain, you know, is there really media today that's not tinged heavily by politics from some angle? I mean, it's in my opinion, no. I think the media plays a big role in the story, by the way, of what happened.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, it's media and politics kind of work hand in hand. Like those things are. It's hard to say where one begins and the other ends. I mean, the stories they put out, the things that they cover, the bias that they put out themselves. You know, it's the way they try to ignore Sanders and anybody else other than Hillary Clinton, and even going to the point at times asking Sanders, should he be in the race? It's like, do you think it's a bit sexist to be in the race? Like, what? What are you talking about?
That's the thing. I mean, the media creates narratives. The narratives, look, the DNC chooses the candidate. It chooses Hillary Clinton, but then it's the media's job to create the narratives that will allow the people to accept that choice as the legitimate choice. So they have to, you know, you can't just like put Hillary Clinton up there and say, okay, folks, you know, here she is. Here's the nominee. The people have to be led by, by their belief that she's somehow a legitimate candidate. How do they do that? Well, they lie to you and they brainwash you, basically. That's what the DNC does. And with Bernie Sanders, we saw that with very specific false narratives that were told throughout the campaign by the media. Starting with the most infamous of them, which was the Bernie Bro narrative, right?
Yeah,
the Bernie Bros.
I remember that. In 1 second, they're saying my sound is cracking up. Guys, are you still hearing my sound cracking up?
It's a little bit sort of fuzzy, so to speak.
Let's change the mic. Make sure nothing's
going
with the mic. This and this. Let's try this. Okay, how about now? Still cracking, crackling.
It's a little.
Address the cracking microphone.
No, it's crackling still.
Let's see. I haven't done anything. Same mic. Let's try change this video. All right. How about now? Still?
Oh, that's much clearer.
Oh, good. Okay. None of the settings had changed, but hopefully the entire video wasn't that way. Jillian,
no, it was just I noticed that I should have pointed out to you, but I could actually hear what you were saying. It just was a little bit fuzzy. I don't think it made you illegible.
Okay. Let me ask you this. This is a big contention, I guess. Personally, I support Sanders. So if Sanders runs again, Sanders has my support. That's never really wavered for me. But there are people who believe that Sanders was complicit in this. Mm-hmm. So not necessarily that he was, somewhat of a victim in the same way, but he was a co-conspirator. So 2 questions. Why didn't Sanders say anything about the cheating? I have my own ideas for this, but why don't you think Sanders said anything about cheating? Because he certainly knew he was being cheated. They mentioned it before, where there was a case where Sanders' teams kind of made this point of, you guys are taking more money than you're supposed to take. You're skirting campaign finance laws, and you're taking more cash. And the guy says, you're accusing us of cheating. Yeah, we're accusing you of cheating. That's exactly what we're doing. So he understood that at the very least, something untoward was going on with the campaign. Does it get to the point where you believe in any way that he was complicit in this? Meaning, it wasn't just these guys cheated me and they had no chance of me winning, but he knew that he had no chance of winning. He pulled those people in with the idea of trying to sheepdog them to the Clinton campaign.
So this is a very interesting question, and I had a good debate with my friend Jeff Campbell on Tim Black's show a couple days ago on progressives vis-a-vis Bernie Sanders right now, and sort of what the way forward is. Now that he's announced the possibility he's going to run for president in 2020. And my opinion on that, is I'm not one of these people who thinks that even though I've been very critical of him and I've very recently, I posed a couple of questions about why he hasn't taken a position on the DNC fraud lawsuit. In my opinion, if you need, I would support him conditionally if he doesn't run as a member of the Democratic Party. In other words, for a third party. And I think if he's going to run for president, he should get up now and untether himself from the Democratic Party, because in my opinion, the Democratic Party is so corrupt and its conduct has been so egregious that, at the end of the day, I think Bernie Sanders tarnishes himself by his association with the Democratic Party. And he is ultimately going to create some serious obstacles for himself should he choose to run in 2020, because he's going to be buying into, these ridiculous Democratic Party narratives that have been pushed forth by the mainstream media that have no basis in fact. And I think it's going to undercut its credibility. And I think it's already starting to do that. And I've seen a lot of discourse about this, and from people, many of them who are closely following the lawsuit, very much identify as members of the class of people who were defrauded, and are extraordinarily disappointed that he's done nothing to get up and stand opposite the Democratic Party, because he is an independent and he's not a Democrat, and he can take the position that needs to be taken vis-a-vis the Democratic Party and say, look, you have to do something to reform yourself so that this never happens again. Because if you can rig an election in 2016, you can rig an election in 2020. And I very much believe that if Bernie Sanders runs in 2020, the Democratic Party will engage in the same tactics, and nothing's prevented.
And that was going to be one of my other questions. If he ran again in 2020, which I think he is, I think the entirety purpose of this whole Unity Commission thing and all this other stuff, at least from the Sanders camp side, I'm very suspicious on whether or not any of that stuff is going to go through. But whatever. On the Sanders side, with this idea of saying we need to get rid of superdelegates and we need to open primaries. That's their position. Sanders is even kind of bitched and moaned about the whole superdelegates thing in the open primaries. Will they rig it again? So say for the moment that they say we're not giving you superdelegates and we're not getting rid of open primaries, and Sanders runs again. What's to stop them from doing the exact same thing again? And beyond that, what's to stop them from using the exact same logic that they used the first time? Yes, we rigged it. We rigged it. But what are you going to do? Let Donald Trump win the presidency? Or what are you going to do? Let Ted Cruz win the presidency? Or what are you going to... It's always, there's a maniac at the door. So you're going to have to put us in. So yes, we cheated you. Yes, we defrauded you. But at the end of the day, there's a maniac.
That's what a lot of people, I think, fail to see right away, which is that, of course, they're going to do the same thing again, based on the logic you've identified. The question... you asked the question of, whether Bernie Sanders was complicit.
Yeah.
I go into this in my book, but I take it, I think, from a different angle. And I think really the issue you have to ask yourself is, if you buy into the two-party system that we have in this country, in other words, this concept that the only legitimate parties that have a chance of winning anything at any level are the Democrats and the Republicans. If you buy into that, do you not also buy into? Are you not also complicit in the logic that permits the Democratic Party to rig its elections? I mean, that's really the question you have to answer, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's a lot of stuff about the two-party system that I think people, I don't think people are aware to the extent that that's not
working in their interests.
It's not part of the Constitution. The Constitution says nothing about political parties. It says, of course, so if it doesn't say anything about political parties, of course, it says nothing about two political parties. And yet, And yet, the laws over time in this country have evolved to basically make it impossible for third parties to have a realistic chance of
they rigged the system in a way before it even started, in that sense.
In elections. And so third parties are shut out of the process automatically.
Yeah, that's a problem.
But I mean, that's nowhere in the Constitution. Okay.
Right, but I'm just saying that's the profound problem. I mean, you have if you've blocked off the path for third parties, there's nothing to pressure either one of the parties to behave differently than what those parties are. Like if you're talking about like the 40s or the 50s, where you had like socialists, you had like unions, you had all of these groups pressing on the left to behave a particular way. The Democrats were somewhat controlled, or at the very least pushed, based on the behavior of other parties that were further to the left. The moment that those parties went away, there's nobody else at the door. And Democrats can say, we are the definitive left. We are the left in this country. There's nothing else further than us. This is what the left is. In which case, they could still be a bought right-wing party. If they were anywhere else, they would be a right-wing party. That's immensely problematic. And it normalizes.
Problematic.
Yeah, it normalizes. Where people think this is normal. Like this right-wing party that's calling itself the left is normal.
It's not beyond even that. The Supreme Court has actually ruled that the two-party system is not only permissible, but essential to our democracy.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Terrible decision. I discuss a lot of Supreme Court decisions in the book. It's pretty heavy on law. So people who like legal opinions, legal analysis, they're going to like a lot of the book, which gives close readings of opinions. And there's a lot that is not well known about what the Supreme Court has done on these issues.
In regards to the parties.
In regards to our political system.
So what's the solution then? Because this is somewhat grim.
Yeah.
Because ultimately there's a difficulty in starting a third party, even though it is almost essential that you start a third party. The other thing is you have a bunch of people who are trying to rush themselves into a burning building of the Democratic Party, believing that they can somehow change it. And, over and over again complaining that, oh my God, these guys don't want to change. These guys don't want to get rid of superdelegates. These guys are keeping the voter rolls from us. Like, they don't get the point that the party doesn't want to change. And they also don't get the point that, yes, it wants your votes, but it doesn't necessarily want you. It wants you to, be complicit in the way it behaves, using the other party, the craziness of the other party as kind of a gun that it places to the head of the people to get them to comply. That's immensely problematic. What is the solution to that? If creating a third party is a difficult thing to do, and keep in mind, the Sanders thing, running as a third party, William Wallace, after FDR passed, ran as a third party candidate. Wallace also was one of the most popular politicians in the country at the time, and Wallace barely got over 10%, if I'm not mistaken, in that election. Would Sanders end up with the same result in that situation? Meaning, is it almost necessary for him to run as a Democrat in 2020?
Well, I think that's a great question. I personally think that the system that was envisioned by the founders is seriously broken, and the two-party tyranny is responsible for that in large part. And so from my angle, it seems to me when you have a broken system and I've identified the cause, perhaps disruption of that particular issue, in this case, the two-party system, perhaps disruption is the best way to at least forge a path to solving the problem.
Define disruption. What does disruption mean?
Well, in this case, it would, that's the thing is, it could, disruption, you never know what actually succeeds in disrupting until you've actually accomplished the task. But putting pressure on the source of the problem, like if you're trying to fix an engine or something and something's stuck, you apply pressure and maybe you dislodge it. So maybe in this case,
pitchforks.
Well, building
It sounds like you're saying pitchforks.
a genuine third-party movement is what's called for. So, for example, Bernie Sanders is the most popular president, or not president, popular politician.
He should be.
He's the most popular politician right now. I mean, I think we were talking about
he is.
At the beginning, right? I mean, Donald Trump would kill for his popularity in polls.
Yeah.
Okay. This is perhaps 2016 was as well, but maybe this is a historic moment that Bernie Sanders could get up and draw attention to a genuine, bona fide third party that could have a legitimate shot at seizing the presidency. And that would be a disruptive moment to the two-party system, especially considering that the Democratic Party seems to be on the verge of bankruptcy right now.
Man, that would be mind-blowing. And it would be mind-blowing for a few reasons. A, it has a chance of success. I mean, if you're trying to pull all those left-leaning groups, like, all of these lefty groups that are somewhat disparate, all throughout the United States, like socialists, socialist alternative, socialist elect, Greens,
right?
All these groups. It's like 5, 10 different groups that are
lefty. They're very dispersed. I mean, the Green Party. I mean, they ran Ralph Nader. Okay, yeah. I mean, nobody is more of, in my opinion, an American hero
than Nader,
a little guy than Ralph Nader. If you look at his track record,
I voted for the guy.
Okay, I voted for him too. Okay, it was I think it was the first vote I cast, in a presidential election in like 1996. People forget he ran in 96 before he ran in 2000. And yet he was unable to build any traction for the Green Party at the level. And then you had 2016, historic unhappiness with the Democratic Party, right? Based on what they did during the primaries, coupled with a historically unpopular guy who ultimately won the presidency on the Republican side. You'd think that would be an opportune moment for people to, all flock to the Greens and Libertarian. But according to the polls, they didn't really do that in any appreciable numbers. I mean, I voted Green.
I voted Green too.
I gave money to the Green Party, but that's why, like, it may take somebody of historic magnitude and popularity like Bernie Sanders had in 2015 to create that rush to the third party that could be disruptive. There was another guy who actually got assassinated for almost doing that. And people don't know this, but his name was Martin Luther King. He was, and this is something I actually learned recently. I don't want to take this on too much of a tangent, but
no, go for it.
It always frustrates me every Martin Luther King Jr. holiday that you get all these tributes to him.
Oh God, yeah.
But they're all empty tributes, and people really don't understand him or what he was all about or what he contributed to this country. And it's almost like this sedate effect that people, when you make a holiday like that, it's. But what I did on Martin Luther King Jr. Day was I got this book, The Plot to Kill King. Unfortunately, the jacket fell off, but I really encourage people to read it because it goes into detail about the assassination of Dr. King and the fact that it was not committed by James Earl Ray, but in fact carried out by the FBI. And the record is very clear. This book is written by the lawyer who represented King's family and they actually filed a lawsuit in order to prove at trial in front of a jury that it wasn't James Earl Ray who killed him, but the FBI. using a trained sharpshooter, and he actually died at the hospital. He was alive when he was taken to the hospital, but the hospital, ultimately made him stop breathing. Okay, and this is not something that people know about. It's not what's talked about on Martin Luther King Jr. Day. I think it's what people need to talk about. Okay, that the FBI did this. But
yeah, they don't. Not only don't they bring it up, they turn him into a peacenik. Like they turn him into this dreamer.
Right.
That they completely separate this idea of the social justice component, the economic justice component
well,
from.
let me just say something about that, because this goes back to the discussion we were having about the so-called disruption. Okay, so before and the author of this book goes into this, William Pepper, who was the attorney for the King family, and actually, they hired him. He was actually a friend of King's before he was killed, and then the family hired him to pursue justice in the case on their behalf. James Earl Ray, this kind of loner prisoner, the escaped prisoner, was presented as the fall guy, Lee Harvey Oswald. But here's the interesting thing. Okay, this is what the author of this book says. Before King was assassinated, he was going to announce that he was going to run on a third-party ticket, okay, with Dr. Benjamin Spock, who was a very popular pediatrician in the 60s with the anti-war protesters, and this was 1968, and they were going to run on a peace ticket, okay, against the Vietnam War. And the belief is that political move by King, because we know that Hoover hated King. We know that Hoover, they had him under heavy surveillance. We know that they even tried to write letters to get him to commit suicide, but what then pushed him over the edge. That's stupid. All widely known at this point. But what people don't know is that the FBI, what pushed them to actually be like, fuck it, we're just going to assassinate the guy in broad daylight, is that third-party ticket with Dr. Benjamin Spock would have been so significant at the time that it may have disrupted the same issues that we've got going on today, maybe in a different form, but here we are. It's almost 50 years later.
It does make sense.
50 years later.
So I can see that. You're talking about the Vietnam War, and you have a draft. You have all of these kids you have bombs going off. You have riots going all over the place. You have civil unrest to a magnificent degree. You have all of these people in the streets protesting riots. And these people were against the war. I mean, they were against the war to some degree for selfish reasons. I mean, they were being drafted. Their friends and family were being killed, and they had no particular reason why. Like, there was nothing that they could put their hands on in regards to what we're trying to accomplish in Vietnam.
But that was the thing about Martin Luther King, is that the mainstream media kind of limits his role, I think.
Yeah,
and completely. They portray him as a civil rights leader.
Yeah, that's all he was.
Certain connotation. No. He was on the precipice of being a transformative political figure on the scale of historic proportions, and that's why he's up there with JFK as having been deliberately assassinated. Obviously, the assassination is deliberate, but having been shot in broad daylight by their own government.
I get grossly annoyed on Martin Luther King's birthday, because you would see somebody like Cory Booker, you would see Paul Ryan staring at a bust of Martin Luther King, and you're like, these people are depraved maniacs. And in no way, they're invoking his name as if there's some aspect of them that's associated with King. It's almost like they're trying to rub themselves in what King was. Democrats do this in a particular way, meaning they exclude everything else other than civil rights. So their context of identity, where they just kind of praise identity as everything else because they don't want to talk about economics or anything else, or anything that would adversely affect their donors. So they stick with identity. So they can say, we love Martin Luther King because Martin Luther King was a civil rights icon. Martin Luther King was a socialist and anti-war, completely anti-war. And none of those things would the Democrats support. Like there's the only aspect of his particular policy that they may get behind would be this issue of identity. Nothing in regards to his economic standpoint, nothing in regards to his war standpoint. So them invoking his name is such a shallow thing to do on that birthday. I mean,
I agree.
yeah,
I think anyone who does that and you see them do that, should be challenged to read this book.
Yeah.
Because this is, in my opinion, this is how you pay homage to the man, is you educate yourself on the conditions of assassination. His family, they paid for this, for the lawyer to bring this case,
to write this.
Meaning that they did not want the issue to die. Okay, they wanted the issue to be preserved in a court of law. And this book, it's a pretty thick book, but it's the fruits of that. So that's how you pay homage to Martin Luther King. Number one, in my opinion, or one of the ways you can pay homage to him at least. And number two, it's interesting to me that JFK. I think more people are becoming acquainted with the concept that he was
the magic bullet
assassinated by the government. There's another great book that you can read if you're interested in JFK. It's called JFK and the Unspeakable: Why He Died and Why It Matters by James Douglas. Okay. And this is a great book as well. And this pieces together actually. A lot of people know the concept of magic bullet or the grassy knoll, and Oliver Stone, I think, did this country a great service.
Yes, he did.
When he released his, I don't know if you saw that.
I did. Yeah.
Movie. I made a great impression on me when I saw it. I was like, a kid, a young teenager or something. I was like, wow, that's really interesting,
Their story makes no sense.
Sorry. Someone came in.
Yeah, the magic bullet story doesn't make sense. Jesse Ventura recently did a review of it.
That's Jamal.
Hello. Yeah, Jesse Ventura did a review of that. Jesse Ventura went and tried to do the shot himself. He's an expert marksman, and he was like, there's no way I can make this shot. I've been in the military for God knows how long, and they're trying to say Harvey Oswald was able to make this shot with this rickety gun, did it all by himself. The story makes no sense.
Yeah,
the bullet stood in midair, and then turned around and hit the other guy.
Warren is a cover story. Okay, and what I like about this book is that when you see Oliver Stone's movie, you're left with a lot of questions. This book actually pieces together a lot of the evidence in a rigorous way, so you start to get into very and you start to realize how Oswald was maneuvered to be the patsy, and you start to understand who was funding the assassination and what groups were being brought in, and the picture starts to become clear. But the real issue is motive. What was it that led them to want to assassinate Kennedy? Yeah. With King, the motive, in my opinion, and in his lawyer's opinion, is that he was about to make an extraordinarily bold and disruptive move, which was to run for president on a third-party candidate as a third-party candidate at a very extraordinary time in his history.
He had energy. I mean, there would have been, like, one of the differences, I guess, between now and then, yes, there's a war. Yes, that war has been going on for 16 years. I think the difference is the draft.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so back then you had somewhat of a pressure cooker. I usually think that events tend to go a particular point until there gets enough pressure in the situation to conform or change the situation itself.
Yeah.
In the Vietnam case, kids were being drafted. The society itself was coming apart at the seams, or at least they
Right.
felt it was. You had people who were rebelling in ways that was aggressive, meaning like setting bombs off in certain places. I can't think of the name of the group. But you had all of this stuff going on at the time with Nixon in the White House murdering people in spades. You had soldiers mutiny in many cases in Vietnam based on the things that they were doing. People coming back messed up. The country was coming apart at the seams.
Yeah.
And then you have a candidate who comes out like King saying, we're starting an anti-war party. We're going to
Yes.
essentially harness all of this energy and unrest
Yes.
that's present, and we're going to start an anti-war party. Yeah, they may have legs on that. Like, that may be one of the things that can get you over the hurdle. I think what we're missing in our case is Democrats lost 1,100 seats, something like 1,100 seats. That's just a massive amount of failure. That's a level of failure that's hard to get across. The pressure during that time was the war, the draft. We don't necessarily have a draft. We have 1% of our military that does all of the killing and everything else abroad. What we do have, however, is them losing. So it's like you have this impetus or this thing that allows them to lose, and the losing creates a certain pressure on the party itself. The pressure is fleeting though. Like, so in the Vietnam case, yeah, there would have been pressure associated with it just from the events. Our events are different. Our pressures are different. And I think one of the problems, and this sounds bad, but if Democrats win in 2018, that would be one of the worst things that could have happened to this country. And I say that just from a long-term standpoint, because I think you're right. The lesson that you get is we lost on every level of government all throughout the United States. We didn't change one thing. Meaning the reasons that we lost, we didn't have to talk about why we lost. We didn't have to talk about why we failed to this degree. We didn't have to talk about how we lost the House, Senate, Supreme Court, 1,100 seats. We didn't have to talk about any of that. We screamed Trump the entire time. So the failures and the reason for the failures, the actual issues, problems concerning their donors and their obsequiousness to their donors, off the table. The room is filled with Trump. 2018, Democrats win the House, and let's say they win the Senate. They were able to do this without making any changes at all into the process, meaning the Unity Commission is going away. There is no impetus to keep that Unity Commission going on. And in 2020, good luck.
Well, they're already fighting the Unity Commission.
Yeah. Yeah,
it's so much for unity.
Yeah, so much for the unity. But I did a video screaming, "I told you so." It was like I'm not good enough of a person to not say "I told you so," and I told you so because I kept making the point that Dem exit, the people who are talking about leaving the party, is the man at the door. Like, that's the doom bringer. That's the thing that's actually giving them any impetus to have any reform at all. If these people weren't there,
I don't see reform.
I don't see reform either. I don't see it.
I think they are depending on the inherent elasticity of the two-party system, which allows the party out of power to get back in power simply by staying not in power. Yeah. And that's going to happen in 2018. I mean, on the other hand, they've really damaged their brand.
Yes.
In a way that, I don't think you had in the 60s. Okay.
Yeah, kind of. So Republicans.
I mean, now, remember those conventions. 68, and I take
this fight convention where they were out there fighting in the convention.
I was thinking more of the earlier 60s because I was still thinking back to Kennedy actually.
Yeah.
But if you flash forward, and I actually get to because this is relevant to in some ways to the question of what happened with Bernie Sanders, but. Those were tumultuous conventions.
Yeah.
Those were tumultuous times. If you look at what happened in 68, the Democratic Party brand was also at a historic low. And I think it's at a low now. The question that is, can it come back? Does that matter vis-a-vis 2018? Or are people so brainwashed that they're just going to run to the polls and vote for the people that aren't affiliated with Donald Trump?
I think it's the latter.
And then, I think
it's the latter. I think they're going to run to the polls. I think the reason why they're rebuffing the Unity Commission right now is because they believe we're going to win in 2018. And
so
they have no impetus to do anything.
So if we play out your scenario, and I think there's a lot to what you're saying, I think, Republicans, I have a pretty open social media presence, so I got a lot of GOP people on my feed, and conservatives, because I like to gauge, all sides of the conversation, because I think it's important that we try to, make predictions based on evidence rather than, conjecture.
Yeah.
But I see a lot of people on the Republican side who, they're feeling good right now, right? They're feeling good. Well, just remember 2008, the Democrats are feeling good.
Yeah.
Okay,
I don't know.
they had the same position.
I don't know why the Republicans are feeling good. They should be feeling good. Like when Trump took office, I had a few things that I thought. I thought he could possibly own that office, depending upon how he behaves. Like if he in any way behaved in the way that he was talking about in his campaign, because if you remember, went to the left. I mean, he was talking about increasing the minimum wage, healthcare. Everybody's gonna have big, beautiful healthcare. All this, he was big, belligerent. Don't get me wrong, but he ran to the left to some degree in the stuff that he was saying and promising. I thought it's possible. There's a 1% chance that he gets in that office and says, I'm not beholden to anybody, so yes, I'm going to push through health care, and yes, I'm also going to give myself massive tax cuts. Meaning, murky the waters to such a degree where it looks like he's behaving on both sides. He didn't do that. He ran full hard to the right. Now, the public itself, I think, is against most of this stuff. I strongly suspect that putting Republicans in office had more to do with ineptness from Democrats, not so much an approval of the Republicans themselves. I
think a lot of Trump was a protest vote.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people voted for him because of his antagonism towards establishment elites and the media, which, the media, he continues to be antagonistic to them. I think it's an easy thing for him to do because all it is talk.
Yeah.
And that's one issue I approve of him on. And I think it's, whenever he takes on the media establishment, I think it's a good thing. The media,
fake news.
in a lot of ways,
everything fake news.
That's our enemy to the truth. Is the mainstream media? I mean, they are what is, holding us back. And especially progressive. Okay.
Yeah.
If you don't think the mainstream media is your enemy in some way as a progressive, I don't know. What we're living in.
Well, they're biased.
And I say
they have a magnificent bias.
I mean as an obstacle to the progressives ever gaining anything in this country.
Yeah.
So when you've been, it's sort of like the enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? So when Trump does that, right, it's a good thing. As far as
they tar themselves, though. I mean, they make themselves look bad. They've been screaming.
You have to point it out. You have to call their shit out. Because every president prior to Trump, whether you're talking about Obama, Bush, so forth, they, they were in some ways conspirators with the media to keep the American public in the dark. So when Trump goes after them and calls them out, well, suddenly the people that are paying attention to what he's doing, now the media is on the defensive. They've got to spend time defending themselves.
About this stuff.
And we see them do this, right? Yeah. How many times have you seen reporters, and that's all they want to talk about is how Trump is, telling them how bad they are.
It's
right?
everywhere. I mean, it's hard. Yeah. It's like Trump in Russia has taken up all the air out of. If you watch CNN, MSNBC, Trump in Russia, every story it's got Trump in Russia. It's amazing. It's the amount of air that this story has taken up. And it's an amazing thing because they haven't been able to create a link between those things, but they've been talking about it for a year and a half. It's
well, yeah. I mean, and people should look at the memo that came out today. I mean, I think the memo is part of this political stagecraft that's going on.
It is.
I mean, there's so much more going on than just 4 pages in a memo that says things that we already knew anyway. But unfortunately, things have to be spelled out, to the American public in some ways, because the American public is, and I say this, kind of despondently, but is in many ways is politically illiterate.
Yeah.
I mean, we haven't the faintest clue, and I didn't until recently, when my eyes were opened through the Bernie Sanders campaign, And I think that's true for a lot of people who have been energized by him, as well as Trump for that matter.
Yeah.
But I think they're seeing the reality of the political system they live in, you know,
Yeah.
and there's just extraordinary corruption within it. And in you know, the FBI and the CIA are two sites of corruption that, you know, people until now haven't had the, you know, the faintest idea about.
Yeah, that's amazing, by the way. The guy getting paid by, look, Democrats have a dog in the hunt in saying that they don't want the memo out. FBI, of course, the FBI doesn't want any information out coming about the FBI being abusive of their authority. And of course, Republicans want this memo out. It has to be shown. I mean, they've been screaming about this Trump-Russia thing. If the memo does what the Republicans said it does, it needs to be shown.
Yeah. Well, I had a chance to read it today.
What did you think? So some of this stuff is like you said, it was out in public. The guy's wife getting all of the money, and then the other guy being in the Hillary camp, or I'm saying this wrong. McCabe getting fired recently, and if I'm not mistaken, McCabe was the one whose wife got all that money. It was like from the Hillary Clinton campaign, and yeah, he was working on the case. I mean, that's amazing by itself.
Yeah,
that's
I mean,
a massive conflict of interest.
And Comey has all kinds of conflicts of interest. I mean, they're all over the place, but here's the core of the memo. This is what's important. The memo shows that the FBI applied for a court order from a court, which is a very secretive court that
FISA court.
Don't know about. And most people don't know about this. I didn't learn about it in law school. I went to Harvard Law School for my law degree.
They didn't talk about FISA court? Like they didn't talk about the...
No, I mean, I took 3 years of law classes there. Okay, it's supposedly one of the top law schools in the country, which is supposed to give you insight in the legal system. And, you know, I'm the type of person when I'm in a, you know, educational setting, I like to take lots of classes in lots of different areas. And there was no class that I know of that talked about the FISA court. Now, I may be wrong on that. I may be misremembering, but, you know, and this was, you know, this wasn't that, you know, long ago. The FISA court's been around since the 70s. No, it's been around. Well, no, it's been around since the 1970s. It was
really. I did not know that. Okay, I did not know that. I thought they put it in with the security
statute was passed in the 1970s. I mean, the real abuses that have happened. You know, originally you couldn't really order surveillance. The surveillance would be just limited to phone tapping, right? I mean, that's really what the surveillance was. Nowadays, it's reading people's emails and texts, and you get a lot more information, right? I mean, that's why WikiLeaks is so powerful. I mean, it's the information of the modern age actually gives you, you know, a very detailed insight into the corrupt behavior. Okay, and that was more murky back, you know, in the 70s. But, you know, the real issues with this memo, Jamal, are that you know, the Obama administration. You know, the FBI people under the Obama administration applied for an order to basically electronically surveil Carter Page, who's a volunteer for the Trump campaign. And, you know, it was based on this, you know, bogus, you know, you have to get probable cause for an order like that, just like a warrant.
And in a normal dossier, the PP dossier.
Now, the difference is in a normal court when you're getting a warrant, you know, those proceedings are in public, okay? So, you know, if somebody's doing a you know, like, you know, you can see them on TV or, you know, on the internet, you can see a probable cause hearing in front of a judge, you know, unless, you know, the proceedings are sealed for some reason, okay? But you can, the proceedings are public. The proceedings of the FISA court are secret, okay? Supposedly they're recorded, but, you know, even though I'm a lawyer, I can't even practice in front of that court.
Wow. So,
I don't know of any
that's amazing.
court where I can't get sworn in, possibly, you know, on a pro hoc vice basis, okay, you know, with the assistance of local counsel, but where I can't, like, practice law in front of that court, having, you know, an American law degree and having passed the bar in my case in Florida and California, and being a practiced licensed attorney, But you know, it's
so they
very
can
strange.
drag you in front of this court,
So you have to be
and
you're a
there's no
government
recount.
attorney. Only government attorneys can practice in front of this court, and they go in and they get an order which allows them to, spy on the person named in the order. In this case, Carter Page, based on probable cause. So they have to show the judge probable cause, just like when you get a warrant. What does probable cause mean? Well, it means
Well,
that
wait. It does when trying to establish probable cause. Is the other person there? Well, I guess the other person can't be there. Who's
no,
there representing the interests of the other person? Because this sounds
only the
massively
judge,
biased.
only the judge is the only gatekeeper, so to speak, is the judge. There's no advocate on the
Wow,
other side, okay,
that's
because
so disturbing.
you're spying on them. I can't say, hey, Jamal,
Can I spy on you?
come
Right,
into
right.
come into court and tell me why I shouldn't spy on you. That's gonna tip you off. And if the same is true in a normal criminal proceeding, for example, if they want to, let's say you have like I'll give you an example. Let's say they want to do a search warrant on a house where gang activity is happening somewhere. Okay, and it's based on and they believe that this house is somebody connected to gang activity, and they want to get a warrant from the judge to basically search the house, search the premise for contraband or whatever. Okay, so they would have to go. So in order to do that, the police are going to have to go get a search warrant on the house. So they're going to have to go in front of a judicial official, a judge, a magistrate, what have you, and they're going to have to show what is called probable cause. Okay, that there's criminal activity sufficient to go in there, and that's the Fourth Amendment, the protection against unreasonable searches and seizures. Okay, you have a Fourth Amendment right for like the police not to be able to just go into anybody's house, okay, and search it. Okay, it's got to be based on a process, due process, sufficient to comply with the Fourth Amendment. Okay, so in this case, let's say.
But it's probable cause standardized.
Right.
Like this sounds massively subjective, meaning it depends on the judge. Like, is
no.
it something where it's a standardized process that a person can come up with and says, this guy is not being massively biased in the process? I guess that's what I'm asking.
I want to preface everything I said on, I'm a civil lawyer, not a criminal lawyer, so I don't have a criminal lawyer's expertise on how these issues are applied.
Oh, fair enough.
I can tell you, in generally, there are legal standards that have applied over time in case law.
Okay.
That is, so there are standards and they're rigorously applied, and this is why this memo is so important. Okay, I'm trying to get to sort of the heart of the issue. In the normal criminal context. Okay, let's just go back to that example. Okay, you're a police officer trying to get a warrant to go and search a house. Okay, how do you show the judge that there's probable cause to conduct a search, to get a search warrant? How would you got to present evidence of some kind, right?
Right.
What kind of evidence do you have to show, though? Okay.
Well,
you don't have to
conduct
a whole trial. No, yeah, I'm asking you. What do you think?
Well, if I guess I would say if I had a witness that says somebody had went to that particular house and that person bought drugs from the house, if I caught somebody doing something at that particular house, some kind of activity, and that person coughed up information, I would imagine if I had some kind of eyewitness testimony.
But what if they want to remain confidential? Say they're a jailhouse informer, associated with this gang. Say they're doing this because the prison's like leaning hard on them. And they're like we're gonna put you in solitary.
Isn't that in it for them to lie? I mean, I guess this is my.
They got to keep their identity confidential. Is that okay? I'm asking, what do you think? Because that's a key issue.
I would imagine there would be some. Okay, I would imagine some cases there would be some information that the person wants that if that information is revealed, the person who tells can get an X. I mean, that person can be
Yeah.
knocked off. So I would
Right.
imagine that if they wanted to put that person in some kind of witness protection, then yes, that person is going to remain anonymous, and they're probably going to have to do it in some kind of secret court that is
Right.
not open to the public. My issue with this is just there is no the only gatekeeper in that is the judge.
Right.
Like the judge is just receiving information against somebody. There's no information as an affirmative for the person.
So
Meaning they're just there to
he or she, the judge has to perform, just as you said, as a gatekeeper. They've got to perform a circumscribed role by law in order to make sure that the FBI or the police aren't coming to them with some bullshit
right.
just because they want to search, just like, just some, crap information or that it's just like, some random anonymous tip from somebody who just called it in because they have a grudge. There's no indicia of reliability from the source, or maybe it's a confidential informant. I'm just throwing out hypotheticals here, but maybe it's a confidential informant, but he's provided reliable information before, and the FBI can swear to that, or the police can swear to that. And that's how those issues get resolved in the normal criminal setting. But in terms of the FISA setting, those issues also come up, okay, when the FBI applies for, an order to conduct electronic surveillance. And in this case, and this is getting back to the memo itself that came out today, it shows that, according to what the GOP wrote, okay, and I think we've already known this already, but it shows that basically the FBI goes into the FISA court and they say, we want an order against this Carter Page because we believe he's, there's probable cause that he's a foreign agent under the FISA statute. And what is the basis for our belief? It's the so-called Steele dossier.
The dossier.
Okay, which they knew
was
had
paid for
been
back
commissioned by the DNC.
That's amazing.
Okay,
That's
they
amazing.
knew that it was political. So now think about it. Go back to the normal criminal context. What if someone asks for a search warrant, okay, but they're going in based on information from actually the neighbor of the house who has a known long-running dispute over something else, right? And that's the basis. Okay, and they don't disclose that to the judge.
That's amazing.
Right? Okay,
that's amazing.
It sound like it's some confidential informant coming from the jailhouse. In fact, it's coming from Joe Smith next door, who has a long-standing feud with his neighbor over their hedges, and they know to hate each other.
That's amazing.
Calling, fake shit. You know what I'm saying?
That's amazing. I kept saying, I was like, they got to release that memo.
Yes,
they got to release it.
Amazing. This is amazing. They kept going back for to the warrant or the surveillance or the valid without telling
the judge. They essentially lied to the judge by omission.
So this makes the FBI look horrendous.
Do you think they would have granted that search warrant, that FISA warrant, if they said, we got this from the Democratic Party's opposition research that these guys paid for? Hillary Clinton paid for this. This is the information that we got. Here it is. Is that sufficient enough to have a wiretap on your opponent? Because this looks gross, by the way. I mean, you're talking about a Democratic Party essentially wiretapping somebody in the Republican Party who's running a campaign against the person who you had as Secretary of State. That looks immensely horrible. That looks really bad.
The question, I think it depends which FISA judge you get. If you get somebody who, and who knows what the answer to that is. But, it depends. The practical outcome may depend. But, from the legal outcome in terms of the case law and whether any information derived from such an order, in terms of the case law that discusses that, no. I mean, it would. I don't think you could deem that to be a credible source without anything else. I mean, it's clearly, and it's already been debunked. But at the very least, at the very least, the judge has to have enough information in front of him as a matter of the court record in order to make a decision. And there is an obligation of the attorneys practicing in any court of full disclosure so that they're not making misrepresentations to the court in which they're practicing. Any attorney knows that. You know, if any lawyer in the court goes into court and intentionally withholds information from the judge, they can expect to be sanctioned. And you can expect that the opposing side is going to point it out. In the FISA court, remember, there's no opposing side.
Right. This is my point.
Even more paramount. The duty is even more paramount when you think about it, because there's no opposing side to point out the omission. There's nobody to get up and say, hey, wait a minute, they're not telling you that the dossier that they're talking about is actually, these are the actual
that's the problem. And this is the problem. I mean, that's exactly the problem. You're completely relying upon the intelligence services to do the right thing, as if the intelligence services are going to do the right thing. Mm-hmm. I mean, if they're even going in there, they're going in there with this idea that we want this person for something. We don't know what it is. They have a built-in bias just from what they are. And the idea that the U.S. government is going to have this kind of this Stasi type system where these guys are, you know, like we're in the old Soviet Union or something, or the old German state, you know, where they're looking over everything that you're doing and into your communications and take you to these secret courts that, you know, you have no way to practice law, and then the judge is just going purely by information on the guy who wants to lock you up. Right. I mean, come on. Like, I don't think this omission is something that's uncommon. I think this will be more likely than not to be the normal way of going about the process. I just
right. Well, okay. The one thing I'll say to that, and I totally understand what you're saying, and I'll get back to the book I was talking about. I mean, it's the same FBI that knocked off King MLK, was about to make the historic move in the political process. Okay, it's the same FBI that helped kill Kennedy. Okay, we have the same FBI. It's, you know, acting, you know, in different ways because we have different technology, and this is one of the ways. I mean, you know, I believe it's a very corrupt organization, but finally, it's being brought into the public eye at some level, and some type of change is being demanded. Okay, you see that, you know, from the Trump side. Okay, and I think that's a good thing ultimately for the government, is that the FBI should be frankly dissolved. I mean, if you have an organization that corrupt, I mean, J. Edgar Hoover was a bad.
Oh yeah, Hoover was amazing.
He was a horrible, horrible man. People don't. I mean, the fact that they work in a building called the J. Edgar Hoover Building. I mean, how disgraceful is that?
It gets across an idea of the organization. Yeah.
Aside from King, who he had on a kill list, he had his own personal assassin team carry out the King assassination. That's how much he hated him. Okay, he made it one of his life's missions. But he also had the people forget what's called in history the Lavender Purge, where he persecuted a gay employee of the federal government, and you know, just, you know, extraordinary bad stuff that he did. He was heavily involved in the assassination of Kennedy. Whether, you know, he was one of the masterminds is probably subject to debate, although I think the FBI played pivotal roles here and there, and also, you know, in the Warren Commission itself. And that's, you know, this is all, you know.
Yeah, that Warren Commission was obfuscation.
You know, an investigation. I mean, you know, you know, you can go on and on and on about how awful he was. He had, you know, a list of, you know, just you know, putting people on disrupting every progressive movement in this country's history that existed during. I mean, he was
not just here, by the way. I mean, not necessarily Hoover outside the country, but the United States was disrupting leftist movements all throughout the world.
Oh,
I
mean, it was
they kept saying Cold War, you know.
Oh, he and the the CIA and the FBI worked hand in glove.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, one of their greatest joint operations was the Kennedy assassination. Yeah. They pulled it off. But who was just a bad man. I mean, and the fact that the FBI pays homage to him to this day, to me, shows the corruption of the organization and that it should be dismantled. Also, we have a Department of Homeland Security. Why do we need an FBI as well? We already have.
Oh God, we have an alphabet soup of these organizations.
Right, but we have
NSA, CIA, FBI.
Right.
Yeah,
that's a great point. But from an organizational perspective, just in terms of good organizational sense, why do you have you have a cabinet level position called the Department of Homeland Security, which is responsible for Homeland Security? Doesn't that encompass the mission of FBI, which is an investigation that investigates domestic crimes and interstate. I mean,
I gotta be honest. I don't quite know what the Homeland Security was. It was this feeling of like it feels like these things so overlap themselves. Like when they came out with the things showing that the CIA built an NSA inside the CIA because it didn't want to go through the NSA to attack other governments and get information from those governments. Like when WikiLeaks was putting out the CIA files. These organizations are maniacs, man. These things are. It seems like there's no tether to these things. I'm curious to know, will there be a consequence for this? Meaning going into a FISA court and not telling the judge the information that would have, like the Steele dossier, essentially using the Steele dossier as a reason in order to get a FISA warrant on somebody in the Trump campaign, knowing full well that this dossier was not necessarily the best level of evidence that you can use to level against Trump.
It was likely a fraud, and it is a fraud. It's and it should have been obvious, I think, and at the very least, the judge would have asked for additional corroboration. Wouldn't have gotten it because they would have given him any corroboration had they had it.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's what's and they kept going back to keep the order valid. Now, the issue, what you say is, will there be consequences? I mean, in my opinion, consequences, in my view as a lawyer, consequences mean legal consequences in terms of prosecutions for abuse of FISA. Okay, which means that, you're not just dismantling the FBI, which I think has to happen. I think the FBI is so corrupt. I think it goes back to Hoover. But you're not just dismantling the FBI, but you're actually prosecuting the people who abuse the statute.
Otherwise, there's
it's
no
not,
reason.
and it's not, but and it's not just a matter of them losing their jobs either. They have to be vigorously prosecuted. Now, I'm concerned that we don't have the legal apparatus to prosecute those people that's strong enough to do it. And look at Menendez, right? Senator Menendez. The DOJ. I mean, that was a pretty clear case, I think. They got a mistrial the first time, and then the second trial, they just said, you know what, we're going to give up on that. That's really concerning to me. They can't prosecute corruption at that level. Are they going to be able to prosecute corruption at this level? Does the Trump administration even have the will? Where's Jeff Sessions?
I keep asking that question. Where is Jeff? Jeff Sessions is out there, trying to lock up stoners.
Trump supporters don't have a great answer for that.
Yeah, I keep asking this question. It's like, to a certain degree, it's a certain level of incompetence on Trump's part. Why did you pick Jeff Sessions? Now, or at the very least, why did you pick an attorney general that didn't necessarily follow your aims? I mean, there were certain things that Donald Trump wanted, and Sessions got in that office.
Trump
didn't do any of it.
Trump came out in favor of medical marijuana, or at the very least, reserving the right to the states.
Sessions, not so much.
Sessions is diametrically opposed to that.
Yeah.
So he wants to go after legal marijuana at the state level, but he shows no inclination that he's going to. Why isn't he announcing investigations today of the individuals that were revealed in the FISA memo to be abusing FISA very intentionally, I would say.
Agreed.
Hell,
bring up investigations.
Charges on this crime here. Why isn't it being investigated?
It doesn't even come up. I mean, it hasn't even been brought up in that sense. Like, I have no idea what Jeff Sessions is. I didn't even know Jeff Sessions was still working as Attorney General. I mean, he's just nowhere. He's vacant. I mean, Trump had been calling for the Hillary Clinton
except on medical marijuana.
That's amazing. Yeah, Sessions is problematic. But Trump should, if you're going to put somebody in Attorney General, you put somebody who has your best interests, who you understand. Obama put in Loretta Lynch. Loretta Lynch full well understood what Obama wanted, and to her credit, was trying to get James Comey to bend what was going on to match the person who Obama wanted to win.
Yeah.
Like at the very least, he was competent enough to put in somebody who was going to represent his interests.
This is
It's
another
like, what is
problem with
Trump
the
doing?
FBI. Okay, the problem, I'm showing you, here's the problem right here. James Comey, you know, his boss is Lynch.
Yes, right. That's my
Okay,
point.
so that's a
She's
problem.
leaning on him to behave a particular way.
Why is the prosecutor the boss of the chief of police? Think about that in, you know, in the normal criminal setting, right?
Yeah.
They're independent, okay, which is why I think the FBI needs to be abolished, okay? Because if the chief of police is trying to please the attorney general, and the attorney general wants Hillary Clinton to be exonerated in the private server, which was a clear crime, absolutely
Yeah.
crystal clear. That's what James Comey's going to do, and that's exactly what he did, which
And that's
was
exactly what he did.
oh,
Changed
it
the
was
language in the
extremely
document. Yeah.
careless. And he did Loretta Lynch's bidding, and we know that because Loretta Lynch openly met on the tarmac with Bill Clinton.
Well, Comey said it. Comey
Right.
said he said, I was uncomfortable with her trying to get me to say that the campaign, this was a matter as opposed to a criminal, this is a criminal investigation. This is not a matter. And she tried to get me to change how I talked about the case to match the Hillary Clinton case. That is literally.
I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. I was just saying that is literally the Attorney General of the United States putting pressure on the FBI to behave a particular way or to talk a particular way in order to favor one of the other campaigns.
That's
amazing.
What troubles me so much is you obviously have a conflict there. If the chief of the FBI is trying to please,
subordinate,
because that's the boss, and that's obvious. So the FBI is problem from day one. To the I don't even recall if it was part of the Department of Justice to begin with. I don't even know if the Department of Justice existed as such at the time. I can't remember, but as long as the FBI is in the Department of Justice, there's a significant conflict there, and it makes no sense. It needs to be shifted out of the Department of Justice or dissolved or something. I mean, it needs to be reconstituted, and that's a prime example of it.
Yeah, that's a mind-blowing revelation. And I remember when they said that, I was like, wait a minute. The Clinton campaign and the Trump campaign, neither one of these parties, no one has any kind of God-given claim to the political apparatus. The apparatus, like the bus driver versus the bus. I always use the analogy of a bus. Yes, somebody can drive the bus, meaning a political party can win and they can drive the bus, but they don't have claim to it. It's chosen. Your representatives are chosen. The idea that one of the parties that was in government was manipulating the apparatus itself in order to, I guess, give a false impression to the public to assist one of the campaigns into operating the bus is problematic. Like that's extraordinarily a big deal, and the media washed over it like it was nothing. I forget what they were talking about that day, but I was like, whoa, did I just hear that? Like, did you just tell me that the Attorney General was putting pressure on the person in the FBI to, and then it becomes, what other pressure was she putting on him? Like, what other pressure was she putting on him to not behave a particular way in the case? This looks.
Well, the reason the media is like that is because it has one objective, which I think you alluded to earlier, which is the strategy of winning the legislature in 2018. And then what they're going to do is try to impeach Trump or put enough pressure on him so that they push back on anything he's done, and
Hello.
So, in my opinion, that's what they're focused on.
Do you think they're actually going to do that? I don't know if. I suspect that Donald Trump helps them. I mean, for all their bitching and complaining and everything else, I would rather have Trump in office than Pence. And if I am a Democrat, and in 2018 I get the House and the Senate,
They're looking to impeach after after 2018. They know they can't impeach now.
Well, no, I'm saying after 2018, isn't it better to leave him in that office as a punching doll, as opposed to trying to get him out that office and putting in somebody more competent like Pence?
Oh, I think the precedent says that they're going to try to force him out. They're going to try to get him to resign, a la Richard Nixon.
Oh, wow.
Because that's their strategy for recovering the presidency, is that you have an unelected vice president like Jerry Ford running against someone like a moderate Democrat like Jimmy Carter. You think of Jimmy Carter as some kind of progressive icon. Let me correct misapprehensions on that from my point of view.
Yeah.
He was a very much a moderate Democrat at the time. He was very opposed to McGovern in 1972. Who, McGovern was the Bernie Sanders.
He was a lefty.
60s
Yeah,
and 70s.
he was a lefty.
There were a lot of similarities that people aren't aware of between his campaign and Bernie Sanders' campaign. And Jimmy Carter was the head of the Anyone But McGovern platform.
Are you serious?
To Democratic Party. And I firmly believe that the Democratic Party worked to undermine McGovern in the election against Nixon. I don't think they wanted McGovern. They preferred Nixon. I think that the Democratic Party exists with the primary objective of squashing progressives from never gaining any traction. That's my personal belief.
No, I don't think you're wrong on that. I think there's a reason for it. I mean, I think if you give somebody something that's actually on the left, then the people can see that, holy shit, that's actually the left. It was like the Sanders campaign opened the door or opened a window, and it's like, wow, did you feel that fresh breeze? I've never felt that fresh breeze before. The last thing they want is something else to show that they're not what they say they are. Meaning, you had Obama runs, he's hope and change and everything else, and then people are let down by what takes place over the 8 years. Then you have primed for hope and change. You see Sanders. And Sanders is what Obama said he was, or at the very least what people thought Obama was, but actually is, if that makes sense. And he creates this kind of problem. If this guy is actually the left, this guy actually means what he's saying, then what are you? Like, what do you represent? If we can look at this guy and we know that this guy is for real, it shows them up for what they are. And that's immensely problematic. Bernie Sanders standing on a stage, opening his mouth, saying things that Democrats can never say, wouldn't come close to saying. And it reveals who they actually are politically. It makes them somewhat politically inept. The last thing they want to do is deal with something like that.
The strategy is the same, I think, as it was in with respect to Nixon, which was, prosecute Nixon or take the legal screws on him enough so that he ultimately steps down. And I mean, I think that's obviously the playbook they're looking to.
Wow.
Is impeach, is that sort of impeachment threat. And you better believe that if in 2018 they are successful in winning back majorities in both houses of the legislature, that they are going to ignite impeachment proceedings against Trump.
Wow, that's amazing. You had George Bush kill 1 million people going into a country saying there were weapons of mass destruction. There was no weapons of mass destruction, torturing, and they didn't impeach him for that.
Well, but that's in line with the foreign policy of this country.
I know. I'm just making this
that's a bipartisan foreign policy.
Yeah, it's just a mind-blowing thing to say. Yeah. Something that creates that much terror and horror in the world. Literally, it's a terrorist act. You're talking about attacking a country, like literally destroying countries. Mm-hmm. And what are they trying to take Trump out on? Like, the disparity between those things is magnificent.
Well,
and that would be hell to pay if they try to impeach him.
He threatens the media apparatus that keeps the people in the dark about their government. So he's very antagonistic to the media.
Yes, he is.
The media was instrumental in rigging the elections against Bernie Sanders. Okay. They were an instrumental conspirator in that conduct. So the less credibility they have. I think that's a good thing for progressives.
Yeah.
Would you agree with
So
that?
let me actually, I do agree with that. Yes and no. So yes and no. I guess I kind of agree with it. You're right. I agree with you that media is a problem. Like media has a particular bias associated with it, so they try to pretend as
Mainstream
if they're
media.
neutral, but there's no such thing as neutral.
I mean, if you want to talk about the perpetration of American atrocities abroad, I mean,
Yeah.
there's been no more vigorous conspirator in that than the American mainstream media.
And the media doesn't bring it up. Or when the media brings it up from the perspective of America is doing, America is trying to do some good work in this particular place. America may mess up, it may make bad decisions, it may, be incompetent, but it's not doing it for bad reasons. And of course, that's, completely wrong. America does do things for bad reasons. It does things for bad reasons all the time. So yes, in that case, yes, I agree with you. There's a certain bias in it. It does have a bias against progressives in the way that, and there's a reason for it also. This kind of corporate run media in a sense. Like you have a corporation who owns some kind of media company is not going to put anything on the air that adversely affects its profits. That wouldn't make sense. Like you have a weapons company or something like that, and your media arm starts to attack your weapons company. Well, they're not going to do that. Like I think they're more inclined to follow a particular path that allows them to maintain status quo.
Well, the media is, it's an oligopoly of basically mainstream media. It's 6 companies.
Yeah.
It's become very concentrated over time.
Thanks, Bill Clinton.
The media itself started as the mouthpiece for large corporations. I mean, that was the origin of television. Was funded by companies like General Electric and so forth that wanted to advertise their products to people. And I think it's also become a brainwashing mechanism by which corporations brainwash the public into certain beliefs that are favorable to their interests. And
buy stuff. Buy this, buy that. You're less than a person if you don't have that. That woman is going to think your ass looks amazing in those jeans. You must buy this body spray. It's like you're less of a man if you're not wearing this cologne.
You can come up with innumerable examples whereby the media brainwashes people to take certain actions. I mean, the political arena is only one. I mean, besides, getting results that are favorable to these corporations that really run things in this country. In the political arena, it's also a very lucrative industry.
Yeah.
Okay. People make enormous fortunes off of the political infotainment industry. Okay. And look what's and so it's the media itself is the business model.
One of the most interesting things. It broke my heart. My political awareness. Some of those people I don't necessarily watch anymore because those people have let me down magnificently. And I don't know those people in that sense. I'm just saying how they were or the perspective of the person during the Bush era changed once they got to the Obama era. Those people shut up over the exact same issues. Keith Olbermann was one of the guys who brought me to a certain political awareness, like his old videos and everything else. Keith, when Donna Brazile came out saying, yeah, they rigged it, Keith Olbermann put out a tweet saying she just ended her career. Now, this is pretty amazing because this woman just said the DNC rigged an election. They essentially cheated one of the candidates in the process. And the only thing that he could say is she lost her career. Not, oh my God, not, I can't believe they did this, not the DNC cheated, holy shit. She lost her career. For him, like you said, this is infotainment. This is political infotainment. I have a party. I'm sticking with this particular party. This woman has just said something that was against the party. She just lost her career.
Right. Yeah. And the media shapes the world in which that particular view of things, which is very lucrative to the people in the media, like Keith Olbermann,
shapes reality.
Shape that world, and they shape people's view of that world. And sort of taking people out of that world and changing their conscience. It's a difficult thing, and there's a lot of people in this country. A lot of them don't really have the time to, really be informed as to the events that are actually happening in this country. So we really have I think, unfortunately, we have a politically illiterate society, and I say that across, class, gender, race, everything you can think of. My impression is that we are not at the level of political literacy where we need to be to have a nation of informed citizens. Okay,
Agreed.
and that's really scary.
That is scary. I mean, particularly
Because
with it's
yeah,
strange because it's like the people, the public is thrashing about. Like it's like a drowning man trying to reach for a life raft, and
yeah,
it pulls, pushes away Clinton and pushes away establishment candidates, goes for Sanders and goes for Trump, like the people on the far ends or considered to be the far ends. It's people I think are aware that something is wrong. I don't think, like you said, they have the political maturity to put their finger on what that is, nor do they have the time to
well,
investigate
we
it.
don't
It's
understand the truth of our political system. I mean, you're not taught in school that you live in a corporate oligarchy
no,
and
you're not. You're
corporations.
taught freedom and
Right.
justice and liberty.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, you're given a sense that election. I mean, that's true, by the way, of every repressive so-called, fake democracy that's ever existed. Is a lot of them have these. In North Korea, people vote. You only have one vote to cast. Okay, so
right, right.
they believe that they have chosen him, and they are led by their propaganda to believe that. Okay, and a
Same
lot
here.
of
It's the same here. It
it's
really is.
it is the same. It's just that the propaganda is of a different character, and the story is different, and it doesn't involve something like a line of divinely inspired people. Although we have some of that. I mean, we have these political dynasties. I mean, why is like Kennedy? Why
Yeah,
is it
Camelot.
giving the Democratic response?
Oh, Yuckmouth. I don't even want to call him a Kennedy. Like Joe Yuckmouth. Yeah, I don't want to call him Kennedy. I need to see his birth certificate. That there's no way that guy is a Kennedy. I'm joking, of course. I did a video showing John F. Kennedy's speech, the Going to the Moon speech, and that's that guy's grandson. And you're like, oh my god. It's like, oh my god, can't
Yeah.
believe this guy's walking around with the last name Kennedy. Um, that speech was horrid. He has like
Yeah.
stuff on his mouth.
Well,
He
what's even more horrid is the Democrats think it's strategically wise to put him as their responder when the most popular politician in the country, Bernie Sanders, is relegated to second fiddle and giving his own response later that evening.
his response
Right?
was on point. His response was amazing. Kennedy's response, you look at his donor list. The guy has donors out the ass, like everything from opioids to
Right.
Raytheon to, just the
Yeah.
guy's bought and paid for. So he gave a speech commiserate with somebody being bought and paid for. I can't give specifics. If I say anything about economics, these guys aren't going to give me any money. So I'm going to talk about, flowery rhetoric and ponies. Now, Sanders gives his speech, and Sanders is nailing down in specifics. Trump said this. Trump didn't do that. He did this. This is going on. This is the money that they're giving to billionaires. This is the guy. I mean, it was like a 20-minute rebuttal of detail after detail after detail.
Mm-hmm.
Completely different speech. I mean, the tenor of it is even different. Jerry, I'm gonna ask one more question because we're
Sure.
getting late, and I've kept
All
you for
right.
so long. Is there anything else that you want to talk about, either the book or the case, or anything else that you want to tell the public before we end for the night?
Well, the book is coming out February 27th. There's I would encourage people to get a copy. It's the type of thing that I meant it to be very thorough, but also accessible, and something that may be used to persuade people. Because I think people of all, on all ends of the political spectrum, need to understand the events of 2016 and what really happened in those primaries. I'm told that there's an audio book version available, which I know that that's a popular way for people to read books nowadays. And Really, that's it, Jamal. I mean, it's been a good discussion. I've enjoyed your
Excellent.
questions. Um,
I appreciate you coming on.
uh, I think that at the end of the day, we need to provide forums for real discussions on real issues, and the independent media has been doing that. We have social media available at our disposal, which allows us to circumvent the media in revolutionary ways.
Yeah.
And so, obviously there are, obstacles thrown up in that path from time to time along the lines of censorship and efforts to, diminish the audience of the independent media vis-a-vis the
People are
mainstream
trying.
media. But, this is a battle that I think, we'll be waging for some time. And I think it may be part of a larger revolution in consciousness that has to happen before we can ever have any meaningful political revolution in this country.
Yeah, I agree. I don't. It's like I don't know how you have the upper revolution without having the base of it. You know, getting
No,
people on board.
no revolution in society has ever succeeded without some type of revolution in consciousness preceding it. I would say that.
Yeah, yeah, I absolutely agree.
So, if it
Jerry,
what
I
it takes,
really.
yeah,
Oh,
no,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, if what it takes is a revolution in consciousness, then maybe that's what we need to focus on first and foremost before we start, um, bickering over policies that we can't implement because we
Yeah,
don't have the leadership necessary to implement those policies.
essentially educating the public,
Yeah.
getting them a little bit more politically aware. I do. People take issue with Sanders, but if nothing else, they have to give credit from that political awareness. There are a lot of people who woke up all at once. And I'll end it on this. My mom um, was a Sanders supporter, but she wasn't one starting off.
Mm-hmm.
And she was like, I don't know who Sanders is. Sanders had like 3-4% of the vote. And once I started doing my channel, she would hear some of my videos, and just talking to her, she would be like, I had no idea that was taking place. It's like, what do you mean you had no idea that was taking place? And realizing that the stuff that we talk about on independent media is not necessarily stuff that continuously comes up on news, or the spin that they give it on the news lacks a certain amount of context. So she would get a story, she would hear part of the story, but she wouldn't necessarily get the full context of the story, in which case you're left kind of incomplete. You're left with a certain amount of, like you said, unawareness in regards to politics. From watching my channel, she's gotten to the point of, yeah, I'm just a Sanders supporter, not just a Sanders supporter. I didn't realize how bad these guys were. And saying, and I think she's a bit naive on this, she's like, well, they have to change. They can't just stay this way.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, but you voted for Hillary Clinton. She says, yeah, so. And I'm trying to make the point to her that you're trying to say they need to change, but I'm saying, why would they need to change if you're going to just give them your vote anyway?
Right.
Meaning, if you're going to give me your vote because you're terrified of the other guy, why do I have to change?
Yeah.
Like the presupposition of the idea of change is dependent upon some consequence for them not changing, and if there's no consequence, then what's the point? But she has come to a certain political awareness. Just seeing her from the previous year to now, in the sense of saying, "Oh my God, I didn't realize our political system was this bad." It does wake people up, and I guess the question is, how do you do it on a mass scale, or how do you do it in a way that gets a lot of people galvanized around a particular thing?
Well, I'll make a final observation for you on that, which is I
For it.
think it's your experience with your mom is very telling to me because I think one of the greatest difficulties encountered by people is the younger generation persuading the older generation.
Mm.
Okay, because I've got two kids, 4 and 6. I mean, I think as a parent, I'm told that as your kids grow older and you grow older, it's very hard not to see them as like that age.
Right,
So,
right. They're always that age, though.
and just knowing a lot more than they do, right? So if you're able to make progress with your mom through social media, of all things, it suggests that there may be a power inherent in social media that we can really harness here, and maybe we should be more optimistic, but we have to keep striving for it.
Great. Jared Beck, thank you very much for coming on to the soapbox. It is much appreciated, man.
It's been a pleasure. I've enjoyed it.
All right, guys, thank you all for coming. I totally appreciate it. Um, and I'm going to end it here. Thanks, everyone. If you guys enjoyed the content, feel free to share, like, subscribe, and of course, you guys can always support through Patreon. Thanks, everyone.